Hi guys, this is Mrs. Thomas. I'm coming to you today with some more first chapters. If you remember, first chapters are where I read the first chapter of a book, and you can decide if that's something that you may or may not want to check out. Remember, you can go ahead and log into your library account now if you'd like, and if you come across a book that you hear me read the first chapter of that you know you want, go ahead and place a hold on it so that we can get it to you and get it in your hands, okay? Remember, if it's a book that a lot of people request to hold on, you just have to wait your turn, so it may take a little bit for you to get it. All right, let's get started. I'm going to start with Tyler Whiteside's Janitors. This is a series that we have. I believe there's 3 or 4 books in the series, and this is the first chapter. You're going to get an F. Spencer shifted the papers on his school desk and looked for 100 times at the graffiti in the corner. Last year's occupant of the desk must have spent hours etching the message into the wooden surface. Mrs. N smells like cabbage. Dummy, Spencer thought. Couldn't even spell cabbage right. Truth be told, Mrs. Natcher did smell a little bit like cabbage sometimes, but she was tolerable. Today, however, a strong Bath and Body Works fragrance filled the 6th grade classroom, and Mrs. Natcher was nowhere to be seen. In her place was a thin, younger woman who had short, stylish hair streaked with pink highlights. She wore high-heeled red shoes and a skirt so short that Mrs. Natcher would have croaked. Turned out that Mrs. Natcher had croaked. Well, almost, which is why Miss Leslie Charmel had been called to Welcher Elementary that morning. Spencer glanced at the clock on the wall. Only a half hour till lunch. The morning had flown by. After a lesson on geography, Mrs. Charmel had started the students creating maps of imaginary lands. Spencer traced a crooked line from his pencil sketch, mountains to the coast. Keep working on your maps, boys and girls, Miss Charmel instructed. I've got to buzz over to the copy machine for a second. With half a dozen papers in her hand and her heels click-clacking on the floor, she disappeared into the hallway. Instinctively, Spencer swiveled his head to glance at Des Riley. Sure enough, there was an already soggy wad of paper coming out of the boy's big mouth. Only a desk away, Spencer's map was an easy target. But with a substitute out of the room, Des wouldn't settle for a smaller target like Spencer. Des was going to spread the fun and the spit to everybody. With a whoop, he tossed the mass of chewed paper into the air. It made a lazy arc across the room, showering everyone below with drops of Des juice. The spit bomb made a fast descent and landed with a splat on Jen McNeil's new back-to-school shoes. Jen screamed, jumping up, shaking her foot wildly. She danced in the aisle as though an army of ants had decided to bonk her in her sock. The vigorous foot shaking sent out a spray of spit, and the wad dislodged, flinging sideways and skidding across Juan Riviera's map. Desperate to save his island, Juan snatched up his map and flipped the spit wad forward. The wad, no longer soggy but still unpleasantly moist, rolled off of Juan's desk and quickly came to halt between the backrest of the chair in front of him and the girl sitting in it. Instantly, she began to cry. As the back half of the classroom erupted into chaos, Des Riley threw his head back and laughed at the ceiling. Spencer, who was still shielding his map, noticed that almost everyone who wasn't dancing, screaming, or crying was doing the same. Those who had escaped the first onslaught were watching Des like rabbits in headlights. Everyone except gullible Gates. Daisy Gates was seated in the front left corner of the classroom, far out of Spit's way. She might have been humming softly, as she often did, but there was so much noise in the room, I couldn't be sure. One thick, sandy-colored braid reached halfway down her back. She sat hunched over the desk, and her nose an inch away from the forest she was drawing. She scribbled more pine needles onto a tree, somehow oblivious to the upset in the room. Des scowled when he saw her. Spencer opened his mouth to shout a warning, but cringed, unwilling to make himself the target. Des pushed himself out of the desk and tromped down the aisle, intentionally treading on somebody's notebook that had fallen on the floor. The back of the room had been quieted. Juan was holding his wrinkled map in front of a fan. Jen was alternatingly blotting off her shoe and drying the tears of her sobbing friend. It wasn't until Des Riley's shadow fell on Daisy's desk that she looked up. Seeing the bulky kid standing before her, she quickly looked down again, vigorously scrawling pine needles. Des bent down to examine her work, and the entire class held its breath. If Daisy had been humming before, she was definitely not doing it anymore. The clock ticked loudly. 20 minutes to lunch. Nice map, Des said. Daisy stopped drawing and looked up. A reluctant smile spread across her face. Thanks, Des. It looks pretty good, except for one thing. What? Daisy asked, looking at her map as though it had betrayed her. You weren't listening when Miss Charmel told us about forests. Des's fat finger pressed down on Daisy's pine trees. Forests can't grow next to mountains. You're going to get an F. Daisy sat stricken for a moment, then fumbled for her large pink eraser. With hasty movements that tore little marks on her paper, she scrubbed at her forest until it was nothing but a gray smudge next to the mountains. Across the room, Spencer's body tensed. That was wrong. Daisy's forest could grow wherever they darn well pleased. Taking a deep breath, Spencer began to say Daisy, but all he could manage was "de" before Des silenced him with a threatening glare. Spencer felt this catch in his throat and he swallowed it down. Where can I put my forest? Daisy asked. Forests only grow on tiny little islands 100 or 200 miles from the coast. In geography, we call them gullible islands. Laughing, Des snapped Daisy's pencil and drew a big fat F at the top of her map. You're so dead, Des. Jordan Height broke the silence. Jordan wasn't as tall as Des. No one in the class was, but Jordan was usually the first to stand up to the bully. Shut up, pretty boy, Des replied, folding his beefy arms. I mean it, Jordan said. Miss Chamel's going to drag you to the principal's office so fast. I don't care, Des shrugged. In fact, I kind of hope so. Maybe Miss Charmel will hold my hand. She's a hottie. The students gasped collectively, and Spencer averted his eyes, ashamed to even be sharing air with Des Riley. You will be going to the office, Desmond, Miss Chamel's voice cut through the gasp. She was in the doorway, large stack of papers in her hand, her face a little flushed, but not as red as Des's. The bully turned to face her, regaining his composure. Let's go, he said. Miss Charmel crossed the room, set the papers on her desk, and returned to the open doorway where Des was waiting for her with a stupid grin on his broad face. And no, she punctuated, I will not be holding your hand. Okay, that's first chapter of Janitors. All right, next up I have Horizon. Survival is no game. This is by Scott Westerfield. Okay, so this one starts out with a transcript of a flight, okay? And I'm not going to read that. It goes through, it's just a page and a half or so. And then it starts with 8 hours earlier. And this is chapter 1, Javi. Next question, Molly said. How many miles of wire are in this airplane? A lot. Put your brain to work, Perez. Estimate. Javier Perez sighed. If I get close, will you stop bugging me with these questions? Nope, you need the distraction. Molly clutched her book of airplane trivia and grinned. I've got at least 14 hours worth, enough for the whole flight. You wanted to sit by her, Anna said from the row behind, and Oliver laughed beside her. Javi groaned, wishing the plane would take off so he could lean back and pretend to sleep. Telling Molly that he was afraid of flying had been a terrible idea, because that made it her job as team leader to distract him, with engineering problems, of course. At robotics club every afternoon, Molly talked while she worked, explaining what she was doing, challenging others to do the same. For her, making robots wasn't just a hobby, it was a conversation. The funny thing was, the distraction was actually working. Once Javi's brain had latched into her question, the plane became more of a huge unknown carrying him away from home than the first time ever. Now it was an engineering problem. How many miles of wire? Javi thought. The 4 members of Team Kilobot, along with their advisor, Mr. Keating, were setting an economy. Brooklyn Science and Tech had lots of rich people who donated money to the school. And when the team had qualified for the Robot Soccer World Championships, some millionaire had stepped up to pay travel costs. But first class to Japan for 5 people, nobody had that much money to give away. Even so, this was what Mr. Keating called fancy economy. Designed for 14-hour flights, Javi's seat was surrounded by buttons, lights, and a video screen, all of which were connected to wires, right? He'd already tested the buttons on his armrest. They controlled the angle of his seat, the reading light, and the screen. There was a button for summoning a flight attendant and a rocker switch with volume symbols. There was even a little remote control for games, which also seemed to be a phone, in case you needed to call someone from halfway across the Arctic Circle. Javi found himself wanting to strip it all down, to see those wires, motors, gears out in the open. He'd been taking things apart as long as he could remember, starting when his mother had let him take apart her busted microwave when he was 5 years old. He imagined the wires under the cabin floor snaking up and around the curves of the chair. And another bright web above him, bringing power to all those lights and air blowers in the ceiling. Conjunctures, Molly prompted. Conclusions? Javi's brain buzzed. Each seat would need at least 100 feet of wire, and there were about 500 people on the plane. That was 10 miles right there on top of the on top of the ailerons, engines, cockpit crammed with gauges, the extra wires needed for the huge business class seats, a few rows ahead. Too much to calculate. So he multiplied his first guess by 10. In the whole plane, maybe 100 miles of wire. Not too bad, Molly waved her book, but it's more like 300. A technical tour de force. Okay, wow, Javi said, though amazement was the surest route to more trivia questions. It seems like a waste using a machine this complicated to fly our dinky little robots to Tokyo. The kilobots are not dinky, Molly said. They're the reigning U.S. champions of robot soccer junior division. Javi shrugged. May I remind you that the other team's robots got broken in shipping? We lucked into this. We would have won anyway, Molly's expression dared him to argue. Javi wasn't sure. He'd seen videos of the robots built by the unlucky finalists from New Mexico, scuttling four-legged scorpions that whacked the soccer ball with their tails. In stark contrast, the Brooklyn kilobots were toasters on wheels, mindless bullies that swarmed the ball, knocking other players out of their way. Like how 5-year-olds play soccer, one of the judges had muttered in the semifinals. And there were, maybe 20 feet of wire in each kilobot? Not exactly a technical tour de force. Last night, Javi's whole family had gathered for a send-off dinner. Uncles, aunts, cousins, all telling him how proud they were. His mother had told stories of him helping on her superintendent rounds when he was little, fixing locks and faucets at age 7. But the whole dinner felt like a fraud. What kind of an engineer gets afraid to be on an airplane? Next question, Molly said. How many Aero Horizon flights have ever crashed? He stared at her. Was she just trolling him now? If building robots had taught Javi anything, it was that way too much could go wrong with machines, no matter how carefully he tested them. The kilobots were always doing unpredictable stuff in the middle of the match. He thought about those 300 miles of wire in the airplane, the millions of rivets, seals, and screws, the engines and tanks full of flammable fuel, all those parts that could break, warp, fail, or explode. I'm going to go with 2, he said hopefully. Nope, Molly said, 0. Really? Yep, no crashes in the whole fleet for 40 years. Huh, Javi felt a relieved smile reach his lips. His irritation with Molly faded. Even when she was trolling him, she always had a plan. Thanks. She shrugged as if to say that his fears were forgotten. Just enjoy the flight, Perez. We're going to win for real this time. Javi gave a fist bump to Team Kilobot. Mr. Keating leaned forward to the row behind. Guys, maybe no more discussion about airplane crashes. Actually, Molly said, we were discussing the total absence of airplane crashes. Still, Mr. Keating said firmly, some people are nervous about flying. Not us engineers, Molly smiled at Javi. Next question. Last question, Javi pleaded. Molly looked like she was about to argue, but then a ping pong went to the cabin and a voice announced the doors were closing. Javi swallowed. Last night, he had imagined himself jumping up and running off the plane when this moment came. But thanks to Molly's distractions, he was managing to sit here quietly. Fire away, he said. This is my favorite one, Molly clutched the trivia book closer, guarding the answer. What do flight attendants call it when the oxygen mask dropped down? Javi frowned. There's a name for that. It's a secret flight attendant slang. Let me give you a hint. The oxygen sensor gets tripped, right? And suddenly all those rubber masks fall off the ceiling. Everyone's freaking out, screaming like animals. So what do flight attendants call it? A really bad day at work? No. They call it a rubber jungle, get it? Because everyone goes primal and there's all those masks hanging down like vines, and usually it's just an accident because of a broken sensor. Javi tried to smile back at her, but now he was thinking about those hundreds of masks up in the ceiling, each tightly wound in its little compartment, like snakes ready to spring out and start a panic. Just one more thing that could go wrong. Okay, so that's Horizon. And then let's do A Good Kind of Trouble. This is a new book. It is a birthday book from a 5th grader this year. First slide, and this is by Lisa Moore Ramey, and it's called A Good Kind of Trouble. I'm allergic to trouble. It makes my hands itch. But today in science, when Mr. Levy starts calling out lab partner assignments, I don't even get the slightest tingle. I just sat there, barely breathing, waiting for him to assign me the perfect partner. He's been promising we'd be starting science labs since the first day of school, but it's been weeks. Lots of time for me to decide on the perfect partner. Mr. Levy has been teaching science at Emerson Junior High for centuries, and he looks like a mad scientist. For real. He has wild, frizzy gray hair and even wears a lab coat every day. He fluffs his hair and adjusts his thick black glasses. I start rubbing my hands against my legs, which isn't a good sign, but I don't pay attention. Any second, he will get to my name. Shayla and Mr. Levy pauses a few seconds, like he's really thinking about it, like he doesn't already have the list in front of him. And Bernard, he says. No, and I mean no. This is the opposite of perfect. I sneak a peek behind me. Bernard sits in the back, slouching low in his seat. Junior high desks weren't made for Bernard. He's not kid size. He's grown up size and grown up big. He catches me looking at him, and his mouth shifts into a mean grimace. I gulp and look away. My sister Hannah would say I'm being just like those people who take one look at a black person and think they need to clutch their purse tight or lock their car doors. I have no problem with Bernard being black. Obviously, I'm black too, but it's him being huge, mean, and scary. Bernard went to the same elementary school as me and my best friends, Isabella and Julia. We were all terrified of him. Everyone I know is terrified of him. Even in kindergarten, he would scowl at everybody, and he'd yell a lot. In second grade, he yelled at me because I got to the Star Wars Legos before he did. He grabbed those stormtroopers right out of my hands. And if you've ever had someone snatch Legos from you, you know how much it hurts. And he didn't say sorry. I told him I needed the stormtroopers, but Bernard looked at me like he wouldn't have minded squashing me right underneath one of his big shoes. Bernard was a bully then, and he's a bully now. Please, oh please, don't let us be doing lab work today. Find your partners, everyone. Mr. Levy claps his hands together. I just bet partnering with me, with Bernard, is some kind of devious experiment. Like what happens if we mix trouble-hating girl with bully boy? Kaboom, that's what. Shayla, Bernard hollers. He sounds mad. I guess he's not happy we're partners either. I walk to the back of the room, to the lab tables, and my feet feel like they weigh 600 pounds. I got the first slide. Bernard's voice is like a bunch of bowling balls all being dropped at the same time. The glass in one of his big paws snaps in two. Oh, I say, he could probably snap one of my fingers just like that. Bernard shakes a hand and starts sucking a finger. I'm sure that's a bad idea. Mr. Levy comes over and sets some new slides next to our microscope. He doesn't even ask Bernard if he's okay. Bernard doesn't look okay. He looks angry, which is basically saying he looks like Bernard. Stop messing around, Mr. Levy tells Bernard. I wasn't, Bernard booms. Mr. Levy shakes his head and walks away. After that, Bernard won't even look at the microscope. He shoves the stack of slides at me like it's my fault he broke the first one. The top slide has a tiny green-brown thing on it, and when I peer through the microscope, I can see it's a bug leg. I think it's from a grasshopper, and I write some notes about it and try not to study Bernard. I don't know if I should say anything to him. I don't want to make him even more mad. When class is over, he gets up so fast he knocks his desk to its side. Instead of picking it up, he storms out of the room. You bet Mr. Levy frowns real hard at that. I pick up Bernard's desk before leaving class. Maybe since Mr. Levy didn't have to pick it up, no one will get in trouble. But my hands itch anyways. Okay, that's chapter 1 of A Good Kind of Trouble. Okay, I have the 5 Lives of Our Cat. This Zook by Joanne Rocklin. Now this first chapter is pretty long, so I will stop partway through for the first chapter. Important stuff. Our cat's name is Zucchini and we call him Zook, but that's not the most important thing about him, and neither is the incredible fact that he's got 7 toes on each front foot and 6 on each one in the back, for a total of 26. Most cats have 5 and 4 for a total of 18. His eyes are blue like old faded jeans. His coat is dark brown. But when he's laying on a sidewalk scratching his back, you can see some white markings shaped like the state of California on his belly, and some black tufts in the spot where Oakland is, which is where we live. At the corner of one ear, on the corner of one ear is clipped off. He's got shaky teeth, black gums, and breath that smells like a restroom in the Chevron station. We smell a smell we love because it's Zook's. If you run your palm along his right side, you can feel something like a little pebble stuck under his skin. It's not a pebble, it's a pellet from a BB gun. And that's not the most important thing about him either. In fact, I try not to think about that too much. 2.5 years ago, my brother Fred and I found Zook in the alley that connects the back of our apartment building to the back of O'Leary's Pizza. We go to O'Leary's a lot because they're famous fried zucchini. Fried is the only kind of vegetable Freddie will eat. It was a warm, sunny Saturday just like this one. Mom was in the stuffy basement laundry room, and Fred and I were sitting out in the alley eating lunch from O'Leary's. We had folding chairs out there, and back then the big blue pots were filled with lavender and red geraniums. You could smell the eucalyptus tree and lavender over the traffic smells. Birds were chirping, which I suppose they're always doing, but this was the kind of day when nice things like that get your attention. Then something else got our attention. Meow, meow. That's another thing about Zook. He's got the greatest pair of cat lungs ever. There he was, stretched out in the warm dirt of one of those geranium pots, howling away as if he and the birds in the alley were singers in a band. Nowadays, Zook is famous in the neighborhood for his singing, but at the time, we'd never heard anything like him before. And then he let Freddie and me pet him, rubbing his head against our legs. Probably hadn't been stroked in a long, long time. I noticed he was wearing a collar with a silver rectangle dangling from it. Incredibly, in the middle of that rectangle was a little sparkly diamond. We lured that starving cat into the building with some fried zucchini. Get it? Zucchini? Zook? Mom said we could keep him, so we cleaned him up, brought him some cat food, and brought him upstairs to live with us. Dad said our family could always use a diamond or the gobs of cash you could get from it. That diamond isn't even the most important thing about him. Anyways, we found out it was fake, but we'd already started to love Zook by the time we'd absolutely found out for sure. Actually, I began to love him the second I met him. The most important thing about Zook right now is that he's sick. And Fred and I are waiting around on the steps of the Good Samaritan Veterinarian Clinic where Zook's getting help. The clinic has big windows in the front, and Freddie keeps jumping up to look in. There he is, I see him, Fred shouts. I push myself up from the stone stairs. I feel like a tired old lady, even though I'm only 10. Where, I say? I don't see Zook anywhere. It's Saturday, so the office is busy. A woman is answering the phone at the front desk. A man is bending over a filing cabinet. People and their pets are sitting around on the couches, and a man with a stethoscope in his shirt pocket is scratching a slobbery golden retriever's ear while talking to the owner. There, Fred says, and I realize he isn't talking about Zook. Fred's pointing to the stethoscope guy. That's Zook's vet. Oh yeah, I say. It was kind of a blur when Mom and me and Fred rushed Zook in that morning, but that's the guy. Fred's looking at him like he's God or something, just like a 5-year-old to think of that. Of course, it is sort of godlike to cure a living, breathing thing. Then a really scary question pops in my head. Even though Zook's vet is probably a good person who loves animals with all his heart, does that also mean he's good at his job? I mean, really good? We go inside and stand near the vet's elbow. He's explaining to the slobbery golden's owner that the dog's medicine has to be given 3 times a day for the first 3 days, and then 2 times a day for the next 3 days, and then once a day until the pills are used up. I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time? Said the golden retriever's owner. A man who looks as smart as you or me, except for the fact that his sweater is on inside out. The vet takes a breath, holds up a little bottle of pills, and explains it again in a fake patient voice about the 3 times a day for the first 3 days, etc., etc. Fake patient voice is always easy to spot because of the slowed down syllables. Hope I remember all that, said the dog's owner. I can hear unhappy yipping coming from behind the big closed doors in the front desk, and you cannot miss Zook's famous yowling over it all. Yow, yowie. There's lots of stuff at the vet to do back there, like take care of Zook, for instance. And when we brought Zook into the Good Samaritan Veterinary Clinic, he didn't look 1/17 as frisky and healthy as that slobbery golden who is now licking Freddie's shoe. That's when all of a sudden I noticed 2 things, 2 important things that make me open my mouth. My big mouth, as some people, or my mother would say. Okay, and I'm going to end it there. You'll have to check out The 5 Lives of Our Cat, Zook, to see what those 2 things are that she just saw. A couple other books I brought in. I'm not going to have time to read first chapters. Is this about Nate Harlow. Nate Harlow is in Lucky Strike by Bobby Perrin. He's the main character, and he would love to be lucky, just even one time. So if you're somebody who you don't feel like you're lucky very often, or you would like to have something lucky happen to you, this would be a great book for you to read. All of these books are fiction chapter books today. I have Orphan Island. This is another new book we got last year. On the island, everything's perfect. The sun rises in the sky, filled with dancing shapes, wind, water, trees. Protect those who live those. When the 9 children go to sleep in their cabins, it is with full stomachs and joy in their heart. And only one thing ever changes. On that day each year, when a boat appears from the mist upon the ocean, carrying one young child to join them, and taking the eldest away to never be seen again. So every year on this day, a boat comes and drops off a young child and takes away the oldest. So there's always 9 kids on this island. Today's changing is no different. The boat arrives, taking away Ginny's best friend, Dean, replacing him with a new little girl named S, and leaving Ginny as the new elder. Ginny knows her responsibility now, to teach S everything she needs to know about the island and keep things that they've always been. But will she be ready inevitably for the day when the boat will come back and take her away from the only home she's ever known? Okay, so this is Laurel Snyder's Orphan Island. And then Gary Schmidt wrote The Wednesday Wars. This is about 7th grader who just started with his teacher, Mrs. Baker, and he thinks the teacher's out to get him. This is set in 1967. So it's kind of a historical, like it's taking place in a different time frame. So the Vietnam War is going on. His family also has a family business, and his dad's concerned about that. So he's trying to stay out of trouble, and all these things are going on in the world, and he thinks the teacher's out to get him. So this is called The Wednesday Wars. Okay, so and this one is an award winner too. You'll see there. Newberry. Okay. All right. So I hope that helps you guys pick out some new books. Feel free to place holds on any of these and enjoy.